In the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew records this story of Jesus talking to these people, and he says, hey, the gospel, the kingdom of heaven, is like a treasure in a field. And a person goes out and he finds this treasure, realizes how valuable it is, and he goes and sells everything that he has to go and buy that field. I want to tell you, the greatest measure of freedom and blessing in this life comes from trusting God and His Word to define our identities. Check out this video for more. Identity is tied up in our being, not in our doing. It's not what we do, it's not what we choose, it's not our preferences, it's not what we like or what even we feel to be true about ourselves. Culture has taught us that though. It says that what you feel about yourself must be who you are, what you prefer in this life, the things that you love about yourself or love about other things in this world. Those are the things that define you. But really, God says something different. In the Bible, God teaches us that who we are is based on who He says that we are. So 3 things for you to remember. Number 1, we are made in God's image. Now here's what that means. It's not what we determine God's image to be. It's like a stamp. So I have this really cool image student stamp here, and if I were to take this paper and stamp it, what happens is the image of the stamp goes onto the paper. Now, the stamp itself is what determines what's going to be on the paper, not the paper. God is the stamp and we are the paper. God pressed His image into us, and we do not get to determine what that is. He does. And so we got to discover God through His Word and what it means to be an image bearer. The second thing is that we are wired with a unique purpose given to you, given to me by God Himself. We have unique purposes from God. Now, we have to search those things out. And as we press into God, and as we press into His Word, He begins to teach us more about ourselves and who we are. And we discover what that purpose is. And the third thing is that you are either God's child or you are not. Now that's the really hard pill to swallow here, but the Bible teaches us, Paul, as he's writing out this book to the Romans, in Romans chapter 10, he says that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, He's your King, and you believe in your heart that He rose from the dead, that is to say that His death on the cross was sufficient to pay for all of your sin, to cover the penalty of our sin, yours, mine, all of us. Right? But then He didn't just stay dead. He rose from the dead, defeating death in its place, giving us a pathway to be made new. So Jesus, you are King, but you've also done everything necessary for me to be saved and made new. He says, if you believe those things, then you will be saved. But earlier in Romans, in chapter 8, he says that for those who are doing that, who have done that, you get to be made God's child, adopted as a son or daughter of God. Now, the blessing of following God means you get to be a part of His family. And as part of His family, man, you get more of God and more of His kingdom. Now, within the constructs, though, of sexuality and gender identity, we seek to fulfill, with all of this stuff, we seek to fulfill what God placed in us. I want you to think about it this way. All of us desire affirmation. We desire to be loved and be told that you are valuable and you're worthy of pursuit. We desire peace. We desire to live with each other in unity and in harmony with each other. We desire even romance. We desire for someone to look at us and say, you are so lovely, you are so incredible that I will chase you down so that I can love you and be loved by you. The other thing is joy. We all desire that. We all desire happiness in this life. And when God designed sexuality and gender, He designed it in such a way that you could find fulfillment in all of those things. But the problem is that ever since the garden, early in Genesis chapter 2, we have decided to define right and wrong on our own terms. So there's this tree in the middle of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and there's the tree of life. And God says you can eat from the tree of life anytime you want and live forever with me. But don't touch the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That belongs to God and to God alone. Now, as you think about that, why would that belong to God and God alone? Well, because He's God and He's the only one with the ultimate wisdom to know what is best for humanity, what is best for all of creation. And so when Adam and Eve were deceived by the enemy and they come in and they take from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they're ultimately trying to decide what is right and what is wrong on their own terms apart from God. Now, every time we do that as humans, we create more brokenness and more sin into this world. And what happens is that our broken choices led by our good motives, they cannot produce the blessing and freedom of God. So anytime we try to rewrite our stories and define right and wrong on our own terms, it ends up in loneliness, depression, anxiety, hopelessness. I mean, you name it. And so when God lays this stuff out and says, this is my pathway for what sexuality is, this is my pathway for gender, these things are really important for us to understand, because even though our culture says one thing about it, we have to trust God, because the blessing and the spiritual freedom that we're gonna find in this world and in the rest of eternity flow from Him and nothing and no one else. And so true fulfillment, what we begin to understand is that true fulfillment comes from the uncomfortable choice of submitting our identities under God's perfect plan. Now, this is not a negative thing. I want you to go back to the garden. I want you to think about it like this. God was not just like ticked. We get this picture in our mind that He's this mad, angry God at Adam and Eve, and He's ready to just boot them out of the garden and be like, get out of my presence, get out of here forever. But that's not what happened. He says, hey, we have to deal with this problem. We have to. They've created this broken cycle in all of humanity, this sin cycle in all of humanity, and we have to get them out of the garden, because if they stay in the garden, they're going to eat from the tree of life and live forever in their brokenness. Now they're naked and they're ashamed. And so the very first thing that God does, or the very first animal that is ever killed, God kills that animal in the garden so that He could clothe Adam and Eve. And it is this picture that one day God would kill His only Son as the payment for our sins, so that we could be forgiven and made new and get to live forever with God for all eternity. But sometimes it comes with this uncomfortable choice of saying, God, I will trust You as the one who is best at determining what is right and what is wrong. And so true fulfillment, I'm going to say it again, true fulfillment comes with the uncomfortable choice of submitting our identities under God's perfect plan. When you do that, what you begin to find is those things that God wove in you, the need for affirmation, peace, romance, joy, they are all fully and beautifully fulfilled in your relationship with God Himself, and then also fulfilled in what a beautiful, godly marriage looks like. And so I want you to think of it like this. Galatians 2:20 says, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but it is Christ who lives in me. And this concept is that even though this is the most beautiful thing in all of creation, to follow God and live under His perfect plan, sometimes it means that we have to make uncomfortable decisions and sacrifice our desires and our understanding of right and wrong so that we can live under His blessing and His protection and His spiritual freedom. So what this says is, hey, Christian, follower of Jesus, because God has created me, created you in His image, saved me from my sins, and made me His child, I'm adopted as His son or His daughter, I will choose to follow Him as my King, even though it's uncomfortable at times. Recognizing this, that the greatest measure of spiritual blessing and spiritual freedom that I am going to find in this life comes from trusting God with my identity. Thank you so much for following along. We love you so much.